The Indiana Fever just made a move that sent their entire fanbase into absolute meltdown mode. At the exact moment when the team is drowning in roster concerns, with every decision being dissected under the brightest spotlight the franchise has ever experienced, the front office chose a path that fans simply cannot understand. This wasn't viewed as a small mistake or a harmless roster adjustment. To many supporters, it felt like a direct betrayal of everything the Caitlin Clark era is supposed to represent. The organization finally opened the developmental roster spot they had been holding onto for weeks, and instead of bringing in front-court size, interior defense, or physical help in the paint, they reportedly used it on yet another guard. That decision instantly ignited chaos online. Fans had spent days screaming about how badly this roster needs toughness around the rim after opening night exposed major weaknesses inside. People watched the Fever get physically pushed around in the paint and believed the solution was obvious: add rebounding, add defense, add size. Instead, executives like Amber Cox and Kelly Kroskopf are now being accused by angry supporters of overcrowding the backcourt while ignoring the team's most glaring weakness. To frustrated fans, the move feels disconnected from the reality everyone else is watching unfold on the court. And because Clark already appears to be carrying an enormous physical and offensive burden, the backlash only became louder. Supporters are starting to fear that the franchise is wasting the most important moment in team history by refusing to build a roster that actually protects and complements its generational superstar.
Well, my goodness. Herb Simon. In case you don't know who Herb Simon is, he owns the Indiana Pacers. He also owns the Indiana Fever. You got your ears on, Herb. I understand you're 91 years old. Whoever your handler is, whoever is running the entire basketball operations, something's got to be done. You got to do something about the leadership with the Indiana Fever, the front office, and one White.
The numbers are what made this decision feel so devastating to fans of the Indiana Fever. Before the latest signing even happened, the roster already had 7 guards fighting for minutes. 7. You already have Caitlin Clark running the offense, Kelsey Mitchell providing explosive scoring, and additional backcourt names like Raven Johnson, Natasha Howard, Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hull, and Shotori Walker-Kimbrough already crowding the rotation. Yet somehow, the front office still decided another guard was the answer. To frustrated supporters, it feels like the Fever are building a roster overloaded with backcourt players while completely ignoring the physical weaknesses that are hurting them most. And opening night against the Dallas Wings only amplified those fears. What was supposed to be the celebration of a new era turned into an exhausting overtime collapse that exposed every crack in the roster construction. The final score, 107-104, felt even more painful because the Stars actually delivered exactly what fans hoped for. Clark finished with 20 points and 7 assists, Mitchell exploded for 30, and Aliyah Boston controlled the interior with 23 points and 7 rebounds. Together, the trio poured in 73 points, more than enough for a championship-caliber performance on national television. But the moment Boston needed rest, everything started falling apart. The Wings attacked the paint relentlessly, the Fever struggled to respond physically, and the bench failed to stabilize the game when the starters sat down. Backup production became a glaring weakness, turning every rotation change into a problem Dallas could exploit. That's why fans reacted so emotionally to the latest roster move. To them, the game already revealed exactly what this team lacks: size, toughness, and reliable frontcourt depth. Yet the organization still doubled down on adding more guards instead of addressing the areas that nearly cost them the game from
Boston,
the inside out.
You heard me say it. Stockton and Malone style. Stephanie White even said Stockton and Malone style. Before she even got hired, I was talking about John Stockton to feeding Karl Malone, and it was deadly. Nobody could stop it. And there has not been a damn thing that showed any team in this league could stop Caitlin Clark feeding Aliyah Boston. But after 14 games, Stephanie White has said, nah.
The warning signs from the Dallas Wings game felt impossible to miss. The Indiana Fever were beaten physically, dominated on the boards, and overwhelmed in the paint during the moments that mattered most. Every possession seemed to expose the same brutal weakness over and over again. The roster simply didn't have enough reliable size to survive high-pressure stretches. With Monique Billings unavailable because of injury, the rotation already looked thin, while Natasha Howard and Damiris Dantas struggled to consistently impact the game physically. The one real spark off the bench came from Saxton Timpson, who scored efficiently and brought energy around the rim, yet fans were left confused when coach Stephanie White limited her minutes despite the team desperately needing frontcourt help. Meanwhile, Aliyah Boston continued carrying an enormous physical burden inside, and supporters are starting to fear that asking her to battle through nearly every high-intensity minute is simply unsustainable across a full season. That's why the latest roster decision caused such outrage. Fans believed the need for rebounding, rim protection, and physical frontcourt depth had been made painfully obvious for everyone watching. Analysts saw it, opposing coaches clearly attacked it, and the fan base screamed about it online non-stop. Yet instead of addressing those weaknesses, the organization doubled down on adding another guard to an already crowded backcourt. To frustrated supporters, it feels like the front office has become obsessed with stockpiling perimeter players while ignoring the structural imbalance hurting the team most. Decisions like drafting Raven Johnson, re-signing Shotori Walker-Kimbrough, and extending Lexi Hull are now being re-examined by fans who believe the Fever are building a roster overloaded with guards while leaving the front court hanging by a thread. And because the team already revolves around the enormous workload placed on Boston and Caitlin Clark, every questionable roster move now feels magnified under the pressure of expectations surrounding this new era of Fever basketball.
Yeah, by the way, you're not doing all of that stuff that Stephanie White's been talking about. Oh, you're going into the blue 10 and all that. You're not doing that unless there is an issue. Otherwise, that's the first time I've ever heard of that in the history of sports. Me covering it and or consuming it. First time ever. We have signed a guard, Bree Hall, to a player developmental contract. We have signed guard Bree Hall. I got nothing against Bree Hall, but it's a guard. I mean, we needed guards like we need to catch rabies. I mean, seriously. Like we all need the swine flu is how.
The timing of the Indiana Fever developmental signing is what made the entire situation feel like a psychological gut punch to the fan base. Developmental roster spots are supposed to be long-term investments, opportunities to bring in young talent with upside and slowly build them into future contributors. But in professional sports, timing changes everything. And by using that precious slot on another guard right now, immediately after getting physically overwhelmed by the Dallas Wings, the front office unintentionally sent a message fans never wanted to hear. They apparently do not see the front court as an urgent problem. To supporters watching this unfold, it feels like the organization is doubling down on the exact philosophy that already failed them on opening night. Even after national television exposed how badly the team struggled with rebounding, rim protection, and interior physicality, the Fever still leaned further into a smaller backcourt-heavy identity instead of addressing the paint. That decision has now placed coach Stephanie White into an almost impossible situation. She was brought in to unlock the dynamic connection between Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston, the kind of elite inside-out partnership fans dreamed could dominate the league for years. But supporters are now asking how that system can truly thrive when the roster around them feels structurally incomplete. How can Clark create space when defenses don't respect the front court depth? How can Boston survive physically all season without consistent help behind her? To many fans, the front office is handing the coaching staff a roster overloaded with perimeter pieces while expecting them to build a championship contender anyway. And that growing frustration exploded online because supporters believe the organization is ignoring the obvious problems staring everyone directly in the face.
Fever front office had the option of hiring someone who would make Caitlin Clark more comfortable, but you chose to feed the clan that hates Caitlin Clark. And you've done this several times already, It can't be coincidence. Fever doesn't deserve CC. Free CC. Are you people afraid to get a big? Nothing against Hall, but a guard is not going to solve your problems. Again, you need a big. Never mind. This unserious franchise is turning the Indiana Fever into South Carolina women's basketball. Good hell to the Lord have mercy. We don't need that. Another guard. I guess they didn't see that.
Fans are no longer reacting to just one roster move or one frustrating decision by the Indiana Fever. What's exploding online now is the accumulated frustration from weeks of choices that supporters believe keep ignoring the team's most obvious problems. The fan base built around Caitlin Clark has become one of the most engaged and analytical audiences women's basketball has ever seen. They track every transaction, study every lineup combination, and instantly notice patterns they feel the mainstream conversation often overlooks. Many of those same fans had already warned that the off-ball offensive approach wouldn't fully maximize Clark's strengths. They questioned the roster depth from the beginning. They worried the team lacked enough size and physical balance to survive a long season. And now, after the decision to add yet another guard, supporters believe they've found proof that the front office may fundamentally misunderstand the identity this roster actually needs. That's why the pressure surrounding coach Stephanie White suddenly feels impossible. Because no matter how she addresses the move publicly, fans believe she walks into danger either way. If she fully supports the signing, critics will accuse her of being disconnected from the problems unfolding on the court. But if she questions the roster construction, it risks creating visible tension with executives like Amber Cox and Kelly Krauskopf before the season has even properly settled in. To frustrated supporters, the organization now feels trapped in a growing conflict between coaching philosophy, roster construction, and fan expectations. And every new decision only seems to pour more fuel onto an already raging fire.
You can create rotations to allow Aliyah and Caitlin's job to be.
To that point, I've watched.
Not only that, but by all means, send your coach in to do an interview with one of the biggest Caitlin Clark haters on the planet. I'm gonna use a word you don't hear very often anymore: cahoots. Are you motherfuckers all in cahoots together? Y'all got that CBA and said, nah, we're good. We got it now. I hate to break it to you. The one thing you better be concerned about is that media rights deal. Because there are ways that networks can go back to leagues and say, we're not getting what we signed up.
The pressure surrounding Wednesday night against the Atlanta Dream suddenly feels enormous for the Indiana Fever, because every weakness exposed in the opener is now sitting under a national spotlight. Opposing teams have already seen the film. They watched the Fever struggle to protect the paint, fight for rebounds, and survive physically when the game slowed down into half-court basketball. And now the biggest fear hanging over the fan base is painfully simple. What happens if Aliyah Boston gets tired, picks up early fouls, or simply can't carry the entire interior workload by herself? Supporters look at the current roster construction and don't see enough front-court reinforcements capable of stabilizing the game when Boston sits. Instead, they see a team overloaded with guards while still lacking the physical size needed to survive against aggressive opponents attacking the rim. That's why even the conversation around ticket prices has become emotionally charged. Fans are looking at those low prices for the Atlanta game and interpreting them as a reflection of growing frustration and fading confidence in the direction of the roster. Many supporters entered this season believing the Fever were building a legitimate contender around Caitlin Clark, Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. But after weeks of roster decisions that appear to prioritize backcourt depth over interior toughness, some fans now fear the organization is solving the wrong problems entirely. To critics, the biggest concern isn't just losing games, it's the feeling that the front office may not fully understand what this roster actually needs to maximize the championship window opening around its generational young stars.
You're a used car salesman. You're a fucking ambulance chaser. You're the worst of the... I mean, what are we doing? Bogus bill of goods. mean, did they send you in undercover to try to kill her career at this point? I mean, all this conspiracy stuff. Remember how many conspiracies have turned out to be real? That everybody thought everybody was crazy? I mean, what is happening here? This is wild shit, to be honest with you. And I swear to God, if the Pacers...
The clock is suddenly ticking very loudly for the Indiana Fever. With only days left before the showdown against the Atlanta Dream, the pressure around this organization feels like it's reaching a breaking point. Every practice, every lineup decision, every rotation tweak is now happening under a microscope because fans believe the roster flaws have already been exposed for the entire league to attack. Coach Stephanie White now has almost no time to figure out how to protect the team's biggest weaknesses before another physical opponent arrives ready to test them in the paint all over again. And if the Fever get pushed around inside one more time, supporters fear the backlash online is going to explode into something far bigger than ordinary criticism. The frustration isn't just about losing games anymore. It's about fans feeling exhausted by what they see as repeated promises, questionable roster decisions, and a growing disconnect between what the team clearly needs and what the front office continues prioritizing. Supporters came into this season wanting a roster worthy of the superstar core built around Caitlin Clark, Aliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. Instead, many now feel trapped watching a front office double down on a strategy they no longer trust. That's why every new move is now being viewed through the lens of panic and uncertainty. Fans are wondering if there's a bigger trade quietly developing behind the scenes, or if the organization truly believes this current structure can survive a championship chase. Others fear the Fever may have already burned their last meaningful opportunity to fix the roster before the season spirals further. And hanging over everything is the biggest question of all. Is White losing control of the situation, or is she trying to coach through a roster built by executives who fundamentally misread the team's identity? Wednesday night suddenly feels less like an ordinary regular season game and more like a turning point that could shape the emotional direction